All roads are cut off. Ukrainian armed forces have been driven into the Kursk cauldron, and the lid will slam shut soon. This is how the fighting in Kursk is being portrayed to a Russian audience. Today, we're taking a look at two different articles written by Alexander Kots. He is a Russian mill blogger who is currently embedded with Russian forces in Kursk to give you an idea of their perspective of how this battle is playing out. Now, to give you an idea of the areas that we're looking at here, starting with deep state map, this blue area is the Kursk pocket, or Kursk cauldron, as Russia is referring to it. This is an area where Ukrainian forces pushed in a couple months ago, took about 1,200 square kilometers of Russian territory. They have slowly but surely been whittled back by Russian forces, and just within the last 48 hours or so, we saw Russia kick off one of their most significant counterattacks since this Kursk pocket first emerged a few months ago. Now, again, we're going to be looking today at the Russian perspective from this fighting, and starting with Alexander Kots. He goes back and forth between the situation on the ground and kind of interacting with the soldiers. In talking with one of them, he says military operations have changed a lot, notes the deputy for armament with the call sign Armada. At the beginning of the war, we could brazenly drive into the enemy's forest or settlement and take it. All they could use were javelins, grenade launchers, but they didn't always hit. Today, it is different. Drones are being used from the air. Electronic warfare is much more effective than 3 years ago. But again, FPVs, or fiber optic drone, or first-person view drones on fiber optics, have already appeared, which is not affected by electronic warfare. Everything is changing, becoming more modern. And he talks about his movement to and from the front line of contact. Kots says they changed into a bukanka. Video here showing what that looks like, a completely covered with anti-drone grill. It's already dark, and we need to make it in time for the shift change, when day drones are no longer flying and night drones have not yet been launched. The road of life to the border is quite an attraction. On the horizon, where the front is, powerful explosions light up the sky with orange flashes. Wartime has no brakes for the night. And in the grill of the windshield, dim headlights every now and then pick out burnt loaves on the side of the road. Trucks, vehicles, and we've got some footage of that here in a second. I drove along these roads in November, and now there is significantly more burnt iron. The deputy commander of the 83rd Brigade for military political work, call sign Tula, gives a strange command over the radio, the essence of which is electronic warfare cover, which ensures more or less safe movement. It's turned on by specially trained people. What he's getting at is there are certain areas where you can turn on electronic warfare coverage or turn it off. You don't want to have it on at all times because it could give away the types of signals that you're trying to jam. So for certain locations at certain times, they flip this on, and it does provide a degree of protection for personnel or vehicles moving through. He says, but the enemy has started to frequently use waiting drones on fiber optics, says Tula, as we drive around 4 burnt-out vehicles at once, 2 pickups and 2 armored vehicles. They simply land the drone on the side of the road and wait for passing vehicles, but they still have to drive, or the Russians in this case still have to drive. And we have seen that tactic utilized by both sides already, where the fiber optic drones come in, land, sit on the ground, and watch for something to drive by, because you got to think if you're on the ground, in this case, you're looking in the air and listening for drones overhead, so you might miss one when it's sitting on the ground lying in ambush, and that's a tactic that both sides have started to utilize. He said it is difficult to fight without logistics, and today any roads leading to the front line are under the close attention of drones, both on our side and the enemy side. Recently, the Russian Ministry of Defense published a 3-minute video, and I'll show it here, of the road to Sudza along the Ukrainian Armed Forces garrison in the Kursk region that is supplied. Dozens of burned cars, armored personnel carriers, and tanks. And we've seen a couple different videos like this showing just the scale of destruction coming from these essentially drone strikes. Almost every one of the losses along this road are from drones. And we've seen it down in the Pokrovsk area as well, with the Russian lines moving towards the front. Ukraine has more options down in that area to bring forces forward, so it's not as heavily peppered by Russian drones as the Russian line is. But in this case, what you're seeing is the Ukrainian side. Again, only one road in and out of Kursk right now, one major road for Ukrainian forces. So it's heavily overwatched by Russian drones, and those are certainly taking their toll. They say, according to intercepts, the enemy is complaining about us strangling his logistics. The chief of artillery of the 83rd Brigade with the call sign Keb told me. Now he is trying to change routes, Ukraine is. He's putting up some nets, trying to fight us somehow, but he's not doing well. All of the airborne units in the area are not letting them get close. They are trying to find an alternative through the fields, through the forest belts. And I think right now it's worth pulling up a map again to show you kind of what they're talking about here. When you look at this pocket that Ukraine controls in Kursk, there's one major road moving in. So there are other ways to get through. You wouldn't have to exclusively stay on the road the entire time. But of course, going off-road does pose challenges as well. Can you make it through some of these tree lines? We've got creeks and water crossings. So there's a single road that Russia is watching and striking with as many drones as possible, not just in Kursk, but also a little further down here inside of Ukrainian territory itself. They continue saying, in talking with an artilleryman, Alexander Kot says, are they troubling us with counter-battery fire? So when an artillery round is fired, usually the other side says, oh, there's the gun, let's shoot at that location. So counter-battery. He asks the commander with call sign Ural. The commander responds, it's noticeably less frequent. I've been fighting since 2022, so I do have something to compare with. Our superiority in artillery is now felt. Our drones work well against their guns. It's obvious that they've lost their nerve. And this is a conversation we've heard a lot of in recent days, especially with the talk of the United States pausing, maybe permanently stopping military aid to Ukraine. One of the areas it certainly will be felt in is the artillery superiority. And in this case, they're saying that in the Kursk pocket, Russia already has artillery superiority, and they're seeing it kind of increase in that direction. Kot says, towards morning, we start packing up. We need to catch the shift change again. The return trip is easier because there's a belief that the enemy only attacks vehicles going to the front. They say that they go back empty, but this is more for self-reassurance. The supply and evacuation groups have to travel this route several times a day. You need to cheer yourself up somehow. And it's understandable when you look at some of the roads, the vehicles that are destroyed left and right. If you've got to drive through that thing, you're probably telling yourself whatever you can to feel like you're actually going to make it through. You're going to be different, right, than all the other dozens of vehicles burned up. It does make sense to a degree that, given a shortage of drones, and there's a shortage on both sides of everything. Maybe shortage isn't the right way to put it, but a limited supply. So if a unit only has so many drones, they're probably going to prioritize the equipment moving to the front rather than that moving away from the front, right? You want to destroy things moving into the fight first and foremost. But either way, we've definitely seen vehicles moving in both directions destroyed on both sides of the front so far. So Alexander Kot published that article on March 7th, and the very next day, March 8th, he published a follow-up titled, quote, the liberation of the Kursk region has gone so fast that our stormtroopers have to be slowed down. The enemy is still fighting back. Now, this was a point of contention in Russian channels just yesterday because in the early morning, we saw a lot of reports that they had made significant progress throughout the entirety of this pocket. And then those same channels came back about 12, 24 hours later and said, guys, slow it down. There has been progress, but the fighting is also very intense. Let's not be premature in our celebrations. But turning back here to Kotz, he says, quote, all the fields to the right and the left of us shimmer in the sun with an unnaturally white shine, which sometimes disappears, sometimes stretches to the horizon like a fishing line. The officer laughs and says, it's the fiber optics. So we've talked about these and shown quite a bit of footage of these fiber optic drones in the last few months, especially heavily used in the Kursk region by both Russia and Ukraine. And we have started to see some pictures and videos showing, that cable that attaches the operator to the drone. When the drone detonates or gets shot down or anything, the cable remains. So there's certain areas of the front right now that are just absolutely littered with some of this fishing line looking fiber optic cable. He says in almost half a day, our units managed to successfully advance several kilometers forward. It's according to the commander of the 22nd Regiment, call sign Apostle. He says, we left at 6 a.m. By noon, we had already occupied the villages. We managed to inflict maximum fire damage on the enemy. I would like to separately note that the artillery and UAV units, which inflicted a crushing blow on the enemy, which allowed us to move forward. We've now consolidated our positions in these settlements and plan to move on. We have taken him, the Ukrainians, into a fire pocket and will methodically destroy him. Now he has a bottleneck left in the direction of Sudza. He will try to retreat there, but we will destroy him. The prisoners say that the supplies are extremely dismal. There's not enough ammunition, food, there is no rotation. This has demoralized him as much as possible. However, we kind of hear both sides of that coming from the Russians in this specific case. They talk about, in the same breath, how they're undersupplied, there's no rotation, and morale is down in the Ukrainian forces. But when asked, are they turning and running or are they staying and fighting, This same commander here, named Apostle, said the 95th Air Mobile Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces is here, well-equipped and well-trained. They only surrender when they have no choice. If they raise their hands up right away, they'd have fewer problems, but they put up stubborn resistance. So again, kind of mixed messaging, and it probably depends a lot on what units, as is the case in any conflict, depends on what units you run into as to whether or not the people are more willing to surrender immediately, fight and then surrender, or fight and never surrender no matter the situation. They continue by saying they fight to the end and we must give them credit, says the regimental commander. We have destroyed more than 100 in this direction. There are corpses everywhere. You will see for yourself. And I can confirm that a lot of the footage that we're seeing come out of Russian channels right now is showing a lot of dead Ukrainian soldiers and destroyed Ukrainian equipment, which, given the direction of the fighting right now, that is where we would expect to see it. We are still seeing a lot of Ukrainian drone strikes, but as Ukrainian forces move back, they're not going to be coming across dead Russian soldiers, if you will, right? So right now we are seeing a lot of that pretty one-sided. He says, we pass under a narrow railway bridge as if through a portal that teleports you into a parallel dimension. Ugly, prickly, sharp, and gloomy. On both sides of the road is a terrible mess of metal turned inside out. Chopped off tree trunks, rocket tails stuck into the road, craters, broken huts, burnt BMPs. There on the side of the road is a Ukrainian Cossack, which looks like it was vomited out by the cabin. In its mutilated womb, there are no less mutilated defenders. There is a charred APC, or Armored Personnel Carrier of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, frozen behind a house with a roof. Nearby in unnatural poses, what used to be its crew. A mangled tank with an anti-mine trawl like a monument to those who cleared a way for stormtroopers through the minefield. This is all of the destruction just lining Kursk, which is inside of Russia. So in this specific case, this is what is seen all throughout Ukraine, in the east and the south right now. And in this specific case, this level of destruction, death and destruction, is being seen on Russian territory. He says here, since the beginning of January, there's been a lot of FPV and drone activity with drops, bomber drones, if you will, dropping grenades from overhead. They say the enemy found gaps in the electronic warfare. We had to constantly change routes, move jammers. We had to monitor and analyze all the time. Now their drone activity has decreased. Our troops have cut off the Ukrainian Armed Forces supplies. They have less artillery. Previously, they could fire 40 155mm cluster shells per day, and yesterday there were only 3. Now, in terms of the supplies moving in and out of the front, again, to go back to the map, it's no question that this is a difficult ask to keep the forces in Sudza resupplied. That has never been easy. And in any military operation, advancing into enemy territory and keeping that supplied is going to be a challenge no matter what. It sounds like right now what we're starting to see, according to Russian sources, is that those logistical challenges might actually be catching up with Ukraine and making it harder and harder for them to continue to hold that territory. As Koss moves around the battlefield, he says on one of the houses, the flags of Russia and the 22nd Motorized Rifle Regiment are flying. It is under them that we are caught by the most terrible sound of this military conflict, an FPV drone flying nearby. There's no point in turning on the UAV detector here. It'll scream nonstop, and will not be able to determine whose drone it is either. The deputy commander of the regiment pulls the bolt of his carbine, and we, having found a second wind from somewhere, abruptly jump into the house that still has a roof. The buzzing fades away. And through the window, I look at the spent FPV lines lying on the ground. It looks like ours, but the very reminder of the drilling sound awakens a third wind, and we cover the distance back to the command post at a light jog. So he's looking at the route that the cables came from, right? So if you're, moving towards Ukrainian forces and the cable comes from behind you, you might be able to assume that it's a Russian drone. If it's coming the other way, maybe a Ukrainian drone. But again, even the fact that they have a cable attached to them, these drones are not always moving in a directly straight line. So I wouldn't necessarily have too much confidence in that, if you will. Turning back to Kotz, he says, meanwhile, the offensive actions of the Russian army in the Kursk region are taking place practically along the entire line of combat. It seems that Zelensky's adventure is close to its logical conclusion, in which there will be no room for bargaining or compromise. So again, wanted today to give you an idea of the Russian perspective. So this entire thing here, start to finish, was the Russian point of view of the fighting in Kursk, which right now is getting a lot of attention, arguably because of some recent moves here in the United States, shutting off the military aid to Ukraine and pausing intelligence sharing. Many of us expected some sort of Russian attack to follow that, not just artillery and missiles, but probably something on the ground. What it looks like right now is that attack is playing out in the Kursk region. So we've got some other stories coming out of this fighting as it is intensifying quite a bit day by day. But I thought this was a valuable look into what the Russian public is seeing around the fighting in Kursk. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.